There's a number that every single person shopping for a sailboat right now needs to understand, and almost nobody does. That number is 24.7%. That is the gap right now between what sellers are asking for their boats and what buyers are actually paying. Not 5%, not 10%, 24.7. On a boat listed at $439,000, that means the actual transaction is closing somewhere around $330,000. Over $100,000 is evaporating between the listing price and the handshake. And the crazy part is, most buyers never even attempt to capture that gap because they don't know it exists. I wanted to understand why, so I pulled over 1,000 active and recently sold brokerage listings across the United States, cross-referenced them with survey data, depreciation curves, and regional pricing, and what I found completely changed the way I think about buying a sailboat. This is what nobody is telling you. Before we get into the data, let me set the stage. The global sailboat market right now is valued at approximately $6.09 billion as of 2024, and it is projected to climb to $8.16 billion by 2033. That is a compound annual growth rate of somewhere between 3.3 and 4.9%, depending on which segments you include. North America alone accounts for roughly 36% of global revenue, which translates to about $2.19 billion. Europe is actually the fastest growing region, contributing nearly 39% of the market's total growth, largely driven by the Mediterranean charter sector. So this is not a dying industry. This is not a market in freefall. The aggregate numbers are healthy, but aggregate numbers hide everything interesting. And what is interesting is what happens at the individual transaction level, where real people are buying and selling real boats. Let me start with the most important chart I built from this data. I tracked the median asking price versus the median sold price across all U.S. brokerage listings for vessels 40 feet and larger listed at $200,000 or more. In late 2025, the median asking price sat at $439,000. That is actually up 2.1% from the 2024 baseline of $430,000, so sellers are asking more. But the median sold price went the opposite direction. It dropped from $340,000 in 2024 to $330,500 in late 2025. That is a decline of 2.8%. So you have asking prices going up and sold prices going down. That is a market that is diverging, and the divergence is accelerating. The average negotiation discount has climbed to 7.26%, up 11% year over year. And this is the average. On boats that have been sitting for 6 months or longer, the discounts get much, much deeper. Now here is the metric that explains everything: days on market. The median number of days a sailboat sits on the market before it sells has stretched to 172 days. That is up 15% from 150 days the year before, nearly 6 months. And that number matters far more than most people realize because of something I call the holding cost trap. Every single month a boat sits unsold, the seller is hemorrhaging money. Slip fees, insurance premiums, depreciation, routine maintenance that has to continue whether the boat is being used or not. For a 40-foot sailboat in a decent marina on the U.S. East Coast, you are looking at somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a month just in slip fees and insurance. Over 6 months, that is $6,000 to $12,000 gone. Over a year, it is $12,000 to $24,000. This creates a psychological inflection point, and the data shows it happens almost exactly at 180 days. Beyond that threshold, a listing is perceived as stale. Buyers start to assume there are hidden problems. Other brokers start to deprioritize it, and the seller, who has now spent thousands keeping the boat market-ready, faces a brutal choice: drop the price significantly or keep bleeding. The data shows that boats crossing the 180-day mark typically see price corrections of 5 to 10%, and sometimes more. This is the single most exploitable dynamic in the entire market right now, and most buyers are completely unaware of it. But the days on market story gets even more interesting when you layer in the supply side. New listings entering the market have increased 14.5% year over year, from 110 per month to 126. That means inventory is growing. More boats are coming onto the market than are leaving it through sales. And when supply increases while transaction velocity decreases, you get exactly what we are seeing: a slow, steady, grinding shift of negotiating power from the seller to the buyer. This is not a crash, this is not a fire sale, but it is a structural rebalancing. And the buyers who understand the data are extracting significantly better deals than those who do not. Now, let me talk about something that most people get completely wrong, and that is depreciation. There is this general assumption that boats just lose value, and that all boats lose value at roughly the same rate. That is fundamentally incorrect. The depreciation curve of a sailboat is non-linear. It is highly variable, and it is almost entirely determined by two factors: brand pedigree and material quality. Let me show you what I mean. A new sailboat from a premium builder like Hallberg-Rassy, Oyster, Swan, or Hinckley will typically lose 10 to 15% in its first year. That initial hit is unavoidable. But after that first year, the curve flattens dramatically. By year 5, that boat is still retaining 75 to 85% of its original value. By year 10, it is holding 65 to 75%. And by year 15, you are still looking at 55 to 65% retention. Now compare that to a production cruiser from a high-volume manufacturer like Beneteau or Jeanneau. Year 1, you lose 10 to 15%, which is similar. But by year 5, you are already down to 65 to 75%. By year 10, 45 to 55%. And by year 15, you have lost 60 to 70% of the original value. That means a hallberg-rassy that cost $500,000 new is still worth somewhere around $325,000 after 15 years, while a comparably priced Beneteau might be worth $150,000 to $200,000. That is a difference of over $100,000, and it is almost entirely attributable to brand perception and build quality. And it gets even more extreme when you compare sailboats to powerboats. An entry-level powerboat loses 20 to 25% in year 1 alone. By year 10, it is retaining only 35 to 45%. By year 15, it might be worth 15 to 25% of what was paid for it. A sailboat from a premium builder retains 2 to 3 times more value over the same period. This is one of the most underappreciated financial realities in the entire marine industry. So what specifically makes premium builders hold value so much better? It comes down to materials and construction methods. Tinned copper wiring instead of standard copper, which resists corrosion dramatically better over decades. 316L marine-grade stainless steel instead of 304, which is cheaper but far more susceptible to pitting and crevice corrosion in saltwater environments. Resin infusion construction instead of hand layup, which produces a more consistent laminate with fewer voids, meaning less risk of osmotic blistering and structural fatigue over time. These are not cosmetic differences. These are structural decisions made at the factory that determine whether a boat will still be mechanically sound in 20 years or whether it will be a floating money pit. And the brokerage data confirms it. Premium builders retain 15 to 25% more value than mass market brands over a 10-year horizon. That is not an opinion. That is what the sold prices show. But here is where it gets really interesting, because brand pedigree is not the only variable. The physical condition of a vessel can swing its market value by 20 to 40% within the same year, make, and model. I found listings for identical boats, same year, same configuration, where one was listed at $300,000 and another at $450,000. The difference was entirely in condition and documentation. And the single biggest factor in condition-based valuation is something most buyers do not even think about until it's too late: standing rigging. Standing rigging is the network of wire cables that hold up your mast. It is the structural skeleton of the entire sailing system, and it has a finite lifespan. Industry standard and insurance requirements dictate replacement every 10 to 12 years, regardless of visual condition. The cost of a full replacement on a 40-foot cruiser runs between $10,000 and $30,000, depending on the complexity of the rig, the number of spreaders, and whether you are using traditional wire or modern synthetic alternatives. A boat with original 12-year-old rigging is not just a negotiation point. It is a mandatory capital expenditure that the buyer will have to absorb immediately upon purchase. And yet, I found hundreds of listings where boats with overdue rigging were priced as though this liability did not exist. Sellers either don't understand the impact or are hoping the buyer will not notice. Smart buyers notice. The same principle applies to sails. A new set of high-performance cruising sails for a 40-foot boat can easily exceed $10,000. Canvas and bimini replacement, another $3,000 to $5,000. Electronics reach technological obsolescence every 5 to 7 years. An engine with 2,000 hours and no documented cooling system overhaul is functionally overdue for a major service. When you stack all of these deferred maintenance items together on a 10-year-old boat, you can easily arrive at $40,000 or more in essential work that has to happen regardless of what the seller is asking. This is what I call technical debt, and it is the single most misunderstood concept in sailboat buying. The purchase price is not the price. The purchase price plus the technical debt is the price. This brings me to the 10% rule, which is the most reliable benchmark I've found across all the data. Annual operating and maintenance costs for a sailboat will average approximately 10% of the vessel's current market value. For a 40-foot cruiser valued at $300,000, you should budget $30,000 per year. That might sound aggressive, but when you break it down, it is remarkably consistent. Marina and mooring fees account for 45 to 55% of total annual costs, running between $6,000 and $15,000 depending on location. Insurance at the cruising tier is another 15 to 20%, typically $1,800 to $3,500. Routine maintenance consumes 25 to 30%, around $4,000 to $7,000 per year. Fuel and consumables make up the remaining 5 to 8%. The total annual cost of ownership for a standard 40-foot vessel ranges from $12,300 to $26,700 per year, every year, and this does not include the major life cycle events like rigging replacement, new sails, or engine rebuilds, which come in large, painful lumps every decade or so. Now let me talk about something that almost nobody in the YouTube sailing community discusses, and that is geographic price arbitrage. The exact same boat, same year, same condition, can vary in price by 30 to 50% depending on where it is located. And this is not random. It is driven by specific measurable factors. I compared pricing for the Beneteau Oceanus 40.1, a popular production cruiser across multiple regions. In Greece or Turkey, a 2022 to 2023 model lists for between 199,000 and 250,000 euros. In Spain or Italy, the range climbs to 220,000 to 280,000 euros. On the U.S. East Coast, the same boat in U.S. dollars lists between 320,000 and 410,000. On the U.S. West Coast, 350,000 to 450,000. That is a potential spread of over $200,000 for the exact same vessel. Part of this is driven by marina costs. Annual fees for a 40-foot slip range from 2,500 euros in Greece to $18,000 on the U.S. West Coast. Part of it is driven by tax status. Many European listings carry a VAT not paid notation, which means the buyer may owe an additional 20 to 25% upon importation or registration in certain jurisdictions. And part of it is driven by simple supply and demand dynamics. The U.S. West Coast has limited slip availability, high demand, and a concentration of affluent buyers, which inflates prices across the board. But the single biggest factor distorting the U.S. market right now is the 15% tariff on boats imported from the European Union. This policy directly affects every major production brand: Beneteau, Jeanneau, Hans, Bavaria, Dufour, Fontaine-Pajot, Lagoon. These are not niche manufacturers. These brands constitute the backbone of the production cruiser market. The tariff adds 15% to the landed cost of every new European vessel entering the United States. On a boat with a base price of $400,000, that is $60,000 in additional cost before the buyer even negotiates options or commissioning fees. The downstream effect is significant. It creates a price floor under late-model used vessels already located in U.S. waters. A 3-year-old Beneteau that is already imported, already commissioned, already sitting in a U.S. marina is now worth more relative to a new one simply because the new one costs 15% more to bring in. This is why 2 to 5-year-old brokerage boats have become the sweet spot of the market. Buyers can acquire a nearly new vessel at a significant discount to the tariff-inflated cost of ordering new, and sellers of these boats have a structural tailwind supporting their valuations. Now I want to talk about something that will save you more money than any negotiation tactic, and that is learning to read between the lines of a brokerage listing. After going through over 1,000 of them, I started to see patterns in the language that correlate directly with the actual condition and motivation level of the seller. This is not about deception. Brokers are professionals, but their job is to present a vessel in the best possible light, and the specific words they choose tell you far more than you might think. Turnkey ready. This phrase appears in roughly 15% of listings, and it is one of the most overused terms in the industry. In its most literal interpretation, it means every system on the boat is operational and the vessel is ready for immediate departure. In practice, it usually means the major systems work, but routine seasonal maintenance may be pending. It does not mean the boat has been recently surveyed. It does not mean the rigging is current. It does not mean the bottom paint is fresh. It means the engine starts and the sails go up. Treat it as a baseline, not a guarantee. Motivated seller. This is actually one of the most valuable signals in a listing because it is a direct admission that the seller is under pressure. The data shows that listings tagged as motivated are statistically more likely to accept offers 10 to 15% below asking price, particularly if the vessel has been on the market for more than 6 months. The motivation typically stems from mounting holding costs, a binding commitment to a new vessel, or a life change, such as health issues or relocation. When you see this phrase, your first move should be to check how long the boat has been listed. If it is past 180 days and the seller is described as motivated, you are looking at a situation where a significant discount is not just possible, but expected. Well-maintained. This phrase is meaningless without documentation. I found it in over 40% of listings, and in many cases, the boats had no verifiable service history whatsoever. A truly well-maintained vessel should have documented engine oil and filter changes every 50 to 100 hours, annual impeller replacements, regular cooling system flushes, zincs changed on schedule, bottom paint applied within the last 12 months, standing rigging inspected and certified. If the listing says well-maintained but the seller cannot produce a logbook or a folder of receipts, assume the opposite until a survey proves otherwise. And then there are the filler words: premium, luxurious, next generation, state-of-the-art. These are marketing adjectives that appear when a listing has no concrete technical upgrades to highlight. They are the linguistic equivalent of empty calories. When you see a listing packed with vague superlatives but no mention of specific equipment, specific service dates, or specific upgrades, that is a red flag. The best listings read like technical specifications. The worst ones read like real estate brochures. Now let me walk you through what actually matters when you are evaluating a used sailboat, because the data survey I reviewed alongside these listings revealed a very clear hierarchy of value killers. These are the issues that destroy deals, collapse valuations, and turn dream boats into nightmares. Number 1. Moisture in chord structures. This is the silent killer of fiberglass sailboats. Most modern sailboats use a sandwich construction in their decks and cabin tops with a core of balsa wood or closed-cell foam between 2 layers of fiberglass. This construction is incredibly strong and lightweight when it is intact, but when water gets in, usually through improperly bedded hardware like cleats, stanchions, or deck fittings, the core begins to rot. Balsa is particularly vulnerable. Once water penetrates the outer skin and reaches the balsa, it wicks through the end grain and can compromise square feet of structural deck in a matter of months. Repairing core rot is one of the most expensive and labor-intensive jobs in marine maintenance. It often involves cutting away large sections of the outer fiberglass skin, removing and replacing the saturated core, and then relaminating the entire area. Costs can run into the tens of thousands of dollars, and the repair is never as strong as the original construction. A moisture meter reading during a survey is non-negotiable. If the surveyor finds elevated readings in the deck or cabin top, you need to understand that you are potentially looking at a 5-figure repair bill. Number 2, engine room condition. I cannot overstate how much you can learn about a boat by spending 5 minutes in the engine room. A clean, well-organized engine compartment with labeled hoses, secure clamps, tidy wiring, and no visible oil residue tells you that the owner was meticulous. It tells you that if the engine room looks like this, the rest of the boat was probably maintained to the same standard. Conversely, if you open the engine access and find oil seepage on the mounts, corroded hose clamps, wiring that looks like it was installed by someone who was angry at the boat, and a general atmosphere of neglect, you should assume that every other system on the vessel has received the same level of attention. The engine room is the owner's signature. It does not lie. Number 3, osmotic blistering. This is common in older fiberglass hulls, particularly those built before the mid-1990s, when manufacturers began using more advanced resins. Osmosis occurs when water molecules penetrate the gel coat and react with the polyester resin, creating small pockets of acidic fluid that push the gel coat outward, forming blisters. Minor blistering on a boat built in the 1980s is not necessarily a deal breaker, but widespread blistering across large areas of the hull indicates a systemic breakdown of the gel coat resin barrier, and the proper repair involves a full hull peel, which means grinding off the entire gel coat down to the laminate, treating the surface, and applying multiple coats of epoxy barrier. This is a major undertaking that can cost $15,000 to $30,000 and keep the boat out of the water for weeks. Number 4, keel and structural integrity. Stress cracks around the keel to hull joint are among the most serious findings a surveyor can report. These cracks, sometimes referred to as a smile because of their curved shape along the leading or trailing edge of the keel, can indicate a previous grounding event, structural fatigue, or even the early stages of keel bolt failure. On a fin keel sailboat, the keel is attached to the hull with a series of large stainless steel or bronze bolts that pass through the hull and into a structural grid or floor system. If these bolts corrode, loosen, or fatigue, the consequences are catastrophic. Keel loss at sea is one of the leading causes of rapid sinking in sailboats. Any evidence of cracking, weeping, or movement at the keel joint should be treated as a potential deal breaker unless a qualified marine engineer can certify the structural integrity of the attachment. This is why the survey process must include both a sea trial and a haul out, and I am amazed at how many buyers try to skip one or both. The sea trial is the only way to test the engine under load. You need to see operating temperatures stabilize. You need to observe the exhaust for color and consistency. You need to feel the transmission engage in forward and reverse. You need to run the boat at cruising RPM for at least 30 minutes and watch for any anomalies. You also need to test every sail, every winch, every piece of deck hardware under actual sailing conditions. Systems that seem fine at the dock can reveal problems instantly when the boat is heeled over at 15 degrees in a building breeze. The haul out is equally critical. It is the only way to inspect the hull below the waterline. You need to see the condition of the bottom paint. You need to check every through hull fitting for corrosion or electrolysis. You need to inspect the rudder bearings, the propeller and shaft, the cutlass bearing, and the condition of the keel bolts and joint. None of this is visible while the boat is in the water. Skipping the haul out to save $800 in yard fees is one of the most expensive mistakes a buyer can make. Now let me shift to something more forward-looking, because the data reveals a fundamental change in what buyers are prioritizing in 2026, and it is reshaping which boats hold value and which do not. The single biggest trend I identified across all 1,000 listings is the rise of what I call the off-grid value multiplier. Buyers in 2026 are not just shopping for a boat, they are shopping for a self-sufficient platform. And the vessels that deliver energy independence are commanding a measurable premium over those that do not. Specifically, boats in the 45 to 60-foot range that feature lithium iron phosphate battery banks and high-efficiency solar arrays are selling faster and at higher prices than comparable vessels with traditional lead-acid systems and generator-dependent electrical architectures. The reason is simple. A lithium and solar setup allows the owner to decouple from marinas. No need to run a generator for 3 hours every morning. No need to plug into shore power every night. No need to plan your anchorage around whether you will have enough juice to run the refrigerator and the water maker overnight. This is not a luxury feature anymore. It is a lifestyle feature that fundamentally changes how you use the boat, and the market is pricing it accordingly. While most cosmetic upgrades offer a poor return on investment, you will almost never recoup the cost of new teak or new upholstery. Modern energy systems are the notable exception. They reduce the perceived technical debt for the buyer, and they align with the dominant direction of the market. Beyond energy systems, buyers are increasingly demanding advanced navigation and comfort technology. Joystick docking, which allows precise maneuvering in tight quarters without traditional throttle and wheel coordination, has moved from a luxury option to an expected feature on boats over 50 feet. Vector fins and gyroscopic stabilizers, which dramatically reduce roll at anchor, are becoming standard expectations in the premium segment. Modern electronics suites with AIS integration, radar overlay on chart plotters, and reliable autopilot systems are no longer differentiators, they are baseline requirements. A boat listed without these features in 2026 is at a measurable disadvantage in a market where buyers have more choices and more time to be selective. There is also a generational shift happening that is beginning to reshape demand patterns in ways the industry has not fully absorbed. The traditional sailing demographic is aging out. Older owners who bought their boats in their 50s and 60s are reaching a point where the physical demands of sailing, particularly shorthanded or solo, exceed their comfort level. This is driving a wave of well-equipped, well-maintained vessels onto the brokerage market, which is part of why inventory is climbing. At the same time, a younger cohort of buyers is entering the market with fundamentally different priorities. They care less about traditional teak and brass aesthetics and more about connectivity, ease of operation, and environmental sustainability. Starlink integration is becoming a genuine selling point. Electric propulsion, while still niche, is generating serious interest, and the ability to manage boat systems remotely through smartphone apps is transitioning from novelty to expectation. This generational handoff is creating a bifurcation in the market. Classic boats with traditional charm but dated systems are depreciating faster, while modern or modernized boats with digital integration are holding value better. The data is very clear on this. Let me also address the regional dynamics within the United States because where you buy matters enormously, and most people do not shop strategically enough. The U.S. East Coast, particularly Florida, has the highest concentration of brokerage inventory in the country. More boats, more competition among sellers, more leverage for buyers. Marina fees on the East Coast range from $8,000 to $15,000 annually for a 40-foot slip. The U.S. West Coast, particularly Southern California and the Pacific Northwest, has significantly less inventory, higher demand, and substantially higher marina costs, running $12,000 to $18,000 per year. The result is a persistent price premium on the West Coast that can add $30,000 to $50,000 to the cost of an otherwise identical vessel. Some savvy buyers are purchasing boats on the East Coast and either sailing them or shipping them to the West Coast, capturing the arbitrage. It is worth running the numbers because even after factoring in delivery costs, the savings can be substantial. So what does all of this mean if you are actually in the market right now? Let me give you the strategic framework that emerged from this analysis. First, always check how long a boat has been listed. If it is past 180 days, you have significant leverage. The seller knows the boat is stale. The broker knows it is stale. Your opening offer should reflect that reality. Second, calculate the technical debt before you calculate your offer. Add up the cost of every deferred maintenance item: rigging age, sail condition, engine hours, electronics age, bottom paint, canvas. Subtract that total from the asking price. That is your starting point for negotiation, not the listed price. Third, demand documentation. If the seller cannot produce a service history, a logbook, or receipts from major work, price the boat as though no maintenance was ever performed, because from a valuation standpoint, undocumented maintenance is the same as no maintenance. Fourth, never skip the survey, the sea trial, or the haul out. The cost of all three combined is typically $2,000 to $3,000 for a 40-foot boat. The cost of missing a major structural issue is tens of thousands. This is the highest ROI expenditure in the entire buying process. Fifth, shop geographically. Do not limit your search to your local market. The price differences between regions are real, measurable, and often large enough to justify travel or delivery costs. And sixth, understand that the market is moving in your favor. Inventory is up, days on market are up, negotiation discounts are up. Sellers are under more pressure than they have been since before the pandemic. This is not the time to accept a listing price at face value. This is the time to use the data. The sailboat market in 2026 is not crashing, it is not booming, it is recalibrating. And in a recalibrating market, the advantage goes to the participant who understands the data better than the other side of the table. After going through over 1,000 listings, I can tell you with absolute confidence that most sellers are still pricing based on what they wish the market was, not what it actually is. And most buyers are still negotiating based on gut feeling rather than comparable sold data. The gap between those two realities is where the real deals are hiding. And now you know exactly where to look.